Friends, the Christmas of 2020 takes us to the conclusion of an eventful year characterized by upending lives and disrupting plans. Many Christmas celebrations all over the world have been quarantined. The manger square at Bethlehem, which is the symbol of the global Christmas, will be comparatively quiet this year. Countless churches where the popular hymn Silent Night will have more to do with global angst than heavenly peace will be remembered. The Time magazine, the most widely read English weekly in the world, has a special cover page on its 14th December issue this year. The letter 2020 in black letters cancelled by two red lines with the phrase the worst year ever. When we open the pages, this is the story of a year you will never want to revisit. And the statement, our most debilitating threat this year was a sense of hopelessness. The first Christmas ever celebrated pointed to the centuries old ambivalent experience of hope and hopelessness. And that experience can be qualified as what we call Bethlehem principle. What is this Bethlehem principle? That God can use the weakest to be the strongest. God can make use of the weakest to be the strongest. The first king of Israel, Saul, was anointed because God had a dream for Israel. The Bible tells us at the beginning of his career, as a smart, fine looking, tall athlete who was ahead, taller than the rest. 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 2. However, he turned out to be a failed king, and the dream that God had for him was shattered. And there comes the Bethlehem principle. Prophet Samuel was sent to a house in Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and he anoints a weak shepherd boy, the eighth of Jesse's son. And eventually, the rule of David will usher in a glorious and prosperous time for Israel. And he would be the king after the heart of God. However, his successors would break once again the dream that God had for Israel. Empires after empires will run over Israel. The 8th century, the great Assyrians will destroy Samaria. In the 7th century, we find great and powerful Babylonian coming over to the south, destroying Jerusalem. In 587, burning down the city and the temple. Followed by 50 years later, the Persian Empire, then the Greeks, the Syrians, and finally in 63, the great Roman Empire. It was around 700 BC we have the prophecy of the first Bethlehem principle from Micah chapter 5 verse 2. But you, Bethlehem, from you will come the one who will be the leader over Israel. However, this dream, this prophecy of Bethlehem principle did not take place immediately. When King Jehoiakim was murdered by the Babylonians, people cried for a Messiah. Without that Messiah, Jerusalem will still be made the object of murder and steal, and Jerusalem will be stolen, burn down structures. They would kill babies and rape women, knock down the temple, and enslave those who are still alive. And the prophecy of Micah did take effect 700 years later, and that will be reproduced by Matthew in chapter 2 verse 6. The Bethlehem principle will be highlighted by Matthew. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, from you will come the leader of Israel. The crib reveals this Bethlehem principle. St. Luke tells us that Jesus was born at the time of Emperor Augustus Caesar. Who was this Augustus Caesar? He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, whose original name was Octavianus. The Roman Senate voted and gave him the title Augustus, a title reserved for gods. So here is a man who wanted to become a god. And the crib, the Bethlehem principle, God becoming an ordinary, fragile human being, a child in the manger. Luke tells us about this idea of Bethlehem principle, from where we draw some conclusions. Luke thrice tells us that Jesus was born in a manger. What is usually in a manger? Food. Jesus is found in the manger because he is going to be the nourishment and strength. No wonder he is born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, house of bread. The one who multiplied bread for the hungry will finally become the food, the bread for the hungry humanity. Secondly, the crib reminds us about the reinstatement of the original plan of God, the reinstatement of paradise, the paradise restored. The first human being who was the king of the universe, who was put in charge of the entire creation, where there was a great harmony between man and woman, between man and the human being, between man and divine, later was disrupted. And in the crib of Bethlehem, we find the angels singing, and it is meeting the earth, where human beings and animals live in harmony, paradise regained. And finally, this crib of this Bethlehem principle tells us that God is accessible to all. Jesus is born not in a palace. In fact, the birth of Jesus is hardly a mile away from the great palace of Herod called Herodian, where there are hundreds of marble steps leading up to great arches and pillars, where we can still see the remnant of a great swimming pool as big as twice the size of an Olympic pool. Jesus is born in a cave where he is accessible to all. Palace will not be accessible to all. He was not born in an inn. Inn is meant for travelers. So Matthew tells us the wise men found Jesus, Mary, Jesus, and Mary his mother, and there they paid homage. So, friends, as we reflect on this great mystery of the incarnation of the Son of God, on this day, we thank God for this Bethlehem principle that all of us, or many of us, who are affected by this great year 2020, maybe because of different experiences or debilitating experiences, God tells us there is a Bethlehem principle. The weakness becomes our strength. I wish all of you a godly, COVID free Christmas and a bright new year 2021. Amen.